Okay, so let's get into it. Today I am talking about how dating outside of the type that we've been dating in the past gives us the best chance of creating a really amazing relationship. And again, I'm going to talk about why we're drawn to certain types in the first place. So before I go into it, this advice, this is not for everyone, okay? If you are in this group, if you are watching this video, you probably have had a bad relationship. Maybe you've had more than one. Maybe you've had a toxic relationship. Maybe you've even been in an abusive relationship. So if you are watching this video and you've had healthy relationships and you're like, my type is fine, this advice is not for you because there's no problem here. Who I am speaking to here is if you have had toxic relationships. Hi, Wendy. If you have been with people who didn't treat you well, who were very cold, who were, maybe emotionally unavailable, this advice is for you. You are who I'm talking to, and I'm talking to myself from the past as well, okay? And so we can develop, or we can be drawn to a certain type of person, a type of person who doesn't treat us well, who is emotionally unavailable, who can't give us our needs. And I'm going to talk about why in a little bit, so stick with me here. But what we need to realize, we have to have this, sometimes what I call like this come to Jesus moment, where we realize that this type that we're consistently choosing is never going to be able to give us what we need. It's a difficult realization to come to, but it's ultimately liberating and freeing. This is what frees us from the cycle of choosing the types of partners that they can't show up for us. They can't give us what we need. So I'm going to now talk about why this is. Why do we have a certain type in the first place? Why are we consistently drawn to people who are cold, who are withholding of their love, who are critical, who just maybe go hot and cold, who don't let us know that we're actually important to them? So one of the reasons that this happens very often is because we don't feel worthy of love. Deep down in our subconscious, we have some sort of association with feeling unworthy, or feeling like love isn't safe, or feeling like love is going to hurt us. So when that happens, love, kindness, care, respect, it actually feels foreign to us because it's what we're used to. So when we talk about this kind of stuff, this all goes back to childhood and our previous experiences. So let's say we had a caregiver who couldn't show up for us, who didn't treat us well, maybe was even abusive or emotionally unavailable. That becomes our norm. That becomes what we're familiar with. And then what happens is when you're a child, you don't understand that, oh, okay, so maybe this was my mother who I had a difficult relationship with. We can't understand that maybe my mother had so many issues herself that they couldn't show up for me. We just think, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve love. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Because we're children, we can't hold the reality that this person has a lot of issues and it actually has nothing to do with us. We take it on as a problem with me. I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, there's something wrong with me. And so people who don't treat us well, who are emotionally unavailable, that then becomes familiar. Our brains are wired to go towards what is familiar. It's the part of the brain, it's like the reptilian brain. It's a survival instinct. And, as I'm going along here, let me know if you guys can relate to this. Give me a heart, give me a comment. Does this sound and feel familiar? Because I know that this was my story pretty much. So you might find that because your brain and all of our brains are wired towards what's familiar, you may find that you have a type. And that type could be, again, the people who don't treat you well, the people who don't show up for you, but they feel familiar. So you're kind of like drawn to them and you don't even know why. It's like a magnetic pull. It feels, at times it feels right. And I can share with you guys some of my own story here. And I've shared this before, but there's been so many times where I have met men and they were not good for me. They didn't treat me well, but it felt so right. It felt like I had met a soulmate or something. It was crazy. And it's not because there's some, predetermined soulmate out there for you. No. It's because of this unconscious stuff. It's because this dynamic, whatever the person in front of you is showing up as, it feels familiar. It feels familiar. So you're drawn to it. So to explain this a little bit more, when we feel unworthy of love, when we feel not good enough, we are going to have that type that doesn't treat us well, that basically just reflects back the beliefs that we have about ourselves deep down. And that's what happens. It's not that we only like the bad boys. It's not that we're only attracted to people who are, maybe slightly narcissistic. That's not it. Because our type can change. And I can tell you from personal experience, I have changed my type. Was it easy? No. Was it uncomfortable? Yeah, in the beginning, yes, it was. It involved me facing some uncomfortable stuff and really just looking at all of these things that I was bringing into my current experience from my past. But I can tell you guys from experience, it is 100% worth it. 100% worth it. So yes, back to talking about the reptilian brain. So our brain is wired to keep us safe, right? And so the very, very primitive part of our brain understands that something that is familiar to us but hasn't killed us yet, that's safe. Which is kind of crazy when you think about it, but that's how that part of our brain operates. It's like, okay, I know this deal. I know this situation. This is familiar. It's safe because it hasn't killed me yet. So therefore, I'm going to go towards it. But this might not even be the ultimate reality, because in a lot of these situations, when you're in a physically abusive relationship that's very violent, yeah, it hasn't killed you yet, but it definitely could. So we don't want to go by this survival instinct. This is it's a very primitive part of our brain. We now have a lot of other functions. We now have all the other parts of our brain that we can use. And so we want to, in this specific situation, we want to override that primitive survival instinct, because in this case, it really is not serving us. I mean, I don't want to live my life just based on avoiding something that really isn't good for me, but it hasn't killed me yet, so it must be safe. That's not what we want to go by here. So let me know, you guys, is this making sense so far? Is the way I'm describing it, the way I'm describing different types, and why that happens, is that making sense? So if you have a certain type, like I used to say that people who were too nice were not my type. I thought that people who were kind to me, I thought they were boring. So let me know if you can relate to this. Have you ever said this? Like, I like the bad boys, or people who are too nice. They're not my type. That's not my thing. That's who I was in the past. I didn't give people who could treat me well or who were treating me well really a chance, because of all this stuff I had going on in the past. So my type was people who didn't treat me well. Again, because it felt familiar. So that's what I was drawn to. That's who I felt that magnetic pull towards. So if you can understand that you may have had a similar experience, and maybe this is something that you can relate to, like, oh yeah, you know what? I have been drawn towards people who didn't treat me well, who were abusive. And you know that consciously. Awareness is what changes everything. So if you can be aware of that, that's huge. That's a very, very good first step to breaking this pattern. Okay. So really, the good news here is that we can change our type. Like I said, I was able to change my type. We can rewire our brain to see things like kindness, to see things like warmth and love and affection as familiar, okay? The way we can do this is through mindset shifts, a lot of the tools that I use in my coaching program. And if you're interested in hearing more about that, or you have some questions about it, you can message me, or you can click on the link in the video description and schedule just a free 15-minute call with me. We can see if you'd be a good fit. But what we do is we dig deep into the subconscious. We dig in there, we see what beliefs we're carrying. Like, I had a lot of beliefs that I wasn't good enough, or that no one was really going to love me. And so I dove deep in there. I released a lot of the emotions that were associated with that belief, that was keeping that belief going. And then I rewired my mind to not see that as true anymore. And that's when my type really started to change. That's when I started to see people who could not show up for me, who didn't treat me well, who were abusive, as very unappealing. Just didn't have any interest in engaging with them anymore. And in turn, the people who were kind to me, who were nice to me, they started to look really appealing. And so this is what I do for all of my clients that I work with here. We go through this deep process of, it's a healing journey, essentially. It's a beautiful, transformative healing journey where we dig up all this stuff, we get all this junk out of your head, stuff that you may be believing that you may not have even realized you were believing about yourself or about other people or about relationships. A lot of people I work with, they have beliefs like there's no good men out there, like all men are bad, and you might not even be consciously realizing it, but deep down, that could be going on. And therefore, who comes into your life? Who are you attracted to? Men who don't treat you well. So let me see here. I have a comment here from Maya. Hello. So she says, I've made a decision when I got divorced to go with a different type. Just what you said. Nice guys were boring. But I started dropping my expectations as all normal guys seem to be happily married. I got desperate. Yeah, Maya, and so when you're changing your type here, what I tell the women that I work with is dating, a lot of it is luck. There's some skill involved and there's some technique involved, but a lot of it is luck and timing. So if you don't meet this type of person right away, don't give up. Doesn't mean they're not out there. They are harder to find, but they are definitely out there. And even as you get older, and you might think, well, there's no one that's going to be out there anymore because everyone is settled down now. A lot of people are getting divorced. That was me, and that may be you too. There's good people that are coming out of just bad marriages or situations that didn't fit them anymore, and maybe they need a little time to heal, right? They need a little time to get themselves together and go on their own healing journey. But when they're ready, and so they will be out there. You just, like Maya said, you might lower your expectations because you really want to get into a relationship. But if you can be patient and wait, you can meet someone. And the older you get, the more picky you are too. Yes, and I wouldn't say you are picky. You're more discerning. You know exactly what you want and what you don't want. You know what works for you and you know what doesn't. So yeah, I would not call that picky. I would say you are very discerning in what you're looking for. So what I was talking about is the way you shift this is to go on that healing journey of diving into your subconscious and loving yourself. Yes, Cheryl says loving yourself first. Yes, I'm going to talk about this at some point. And I have posted about this before, but the way I see it, it isn't that we need to completely love ourselves first. What we need to do is love ourselves, and at the same time, once we get to a place where we are healed enough to be in a relationship, we can then love other people, because self-love and love of others is actually the same thing. Where I think most people get it a little bit confused is when we're talking about someone who has come out of a toxic relationship or an abusive relationship. the focus needs to be on treating yourself well, on loving yourself. So it's actually two different discussions, but yeah, Cheryl, I mean, that is what you need to do. Coming out of a bad relationship, you do need to focus on loving yourself first. Eventually, when you feel like you've healed and you are ready to get into a relationship, you can love yourself and love someone else at the same time. Okay, it doesn't have to be you're just loving yourself, because honestly, the self-love journey is a lifelong journey. You know, this isn't something that you just do and you're done with it after a couple months. No, it's a lifelong process. So you can love yourself and love other people, but just to be clear, coming straight out of a bad relationship, you absolutely have to love yourself first. Okay, so yeah, Wendy says, I've learned to have more realistic expectations. Wendy, that can be huge too. I know this was the journey for me too. So I had, and this is the journey that I take a lot of my clients on. I had this image of the person who I thought I would be with. They looked a certain way, they acted a certain way, but then, you know, the reality of the partner who showed up in my life was actually kind of different. Wasn't who I pictured in my head. And it's not that he didn't meet those expectations, it was just different. So I had to kind of like get out of my own way to let this person in. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yes, sometimes we can have such unrealistic expectations that stem from being afraid of love. It can be another way of blocking love, of sabotaging our chance at happiness and having someone in our life that really cares about us. So we have these high expectations that no one can actually meet, you know. So I don't know if that's definitely what's going on with you, but that could be. So if you can learn to lower your expectations, that can help a great deal. So Maya says, I've tried to love myself, but I just don't like being alone. And I know it's not right, but I can't put myself first. So yeah, Maya, we'll have to talk more about this. But, you know, the self-love journey is a difficult journey. And that's why I always recommend getting support for this. Because loving yourself is what completely changes this dynamic. Because if you can love yourself, if you can be okay with being alone for a little while, this doesn't have to be forever. You're not resigning yourself to being single for the rest of your life, but if you can be by yourself for a little while with support around you, you then have the power to be not choosy, but to have discernment in the partners that you bring into your life. You have the ability then to say, you know what, when someone is showing up in a way that isn't respectful or isn't up to the level that you need them to be, you can say, you know what, this isn't working for me. I don't want this. And you go on to the next person. So yes, loving yourself is hugely important in being able to change this dynamic. And if anyone is struggling with this, please reach out to me, because this is what I specialize in. I hold a space where you can go on this journey, and I give you all the healing tools to make it possible. So yeah, you know, speaking of my program, you guys, so this is a transformative program. It's a one-on-one coaching program it's 12 weeks long, and I'm currently offering it for, at the lowest, I have payment plans for $400 a month. This will not last forever. My price will be going up soon. So if you have any interest in this, if you just, you know, are curious about it and want to see if it's for you, message me, or again, click on that link, because again, this low price will not last very long. The price is going to go up in the future. So as we do this, as we dive deep into our subconscious, as we rewire the beliefs that we have about ourselves, about love, about relationships, as we release the emotional baggage, these kind, caring people that we previously were like, yeah, they're not my type, they actually start to become appealing. And so this is what gives us the best chance of creating a happy, healthy relationship. Because let's be honest, the type that we were choosing in the past, it's not going to work with them. They do not have the capacity to show up in the way that we need and the way that we deserve. So is this making sense to you guys? And do you have any questions about this process, about choosing a different type? and really about anything else that you're struggling with. This is your space that I offer every week to just bring issues and questions to me, and I can answer them for you. So the advice that I give people that come to me, like, because they might ask, well, okay, yeah, I know I need to change my type, but how do I actually do that? Excuse me. So again, we do the subconscious work, but what I tell them is go for someone that you may not have gone for before and just see what happens. Just see what happens. Because what can start to happen is you can start to find the very qualities of kindness, of how well they treat you, of how they're able to meet all your needs. You may start to find those very appealing. And again, it may not happen overnight. It may take some time, but all of those qualities can be very, very attractive and appealing if you give it some time. What I tell people is you want to go for the slow burn. The person who shows up and who, may not wow you at first, but you're like, they're really nice, they're very cool, and I think they're cute. Let's see where it goes. I don't feel that really strong pull. I don't feel that strong attraction like I did with my previous partners, but you know what? Let me give it a chance. And sometimes when you do, the feelings do develop. The attraction does develop. Not always, but with people like this who can give you everything that you need, who are good guys, or women too, if you date women who are good women, it's worth giving them the shot to see if something can develop. So something that I also want to mention here is, something that I have experienced and something that my clients have experienced too when they get to this point where they're giving someone who's a different type than they normally have gone for a chance. And they hit this point and they're like, you know what? Something's missing here. Something's missing here. Like, I don't know what it is. I can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe, something doesn't feel right like these other relationships did. And what I would say is yes. What is missing is the familiar dysfunction. And so if you're going on this journey of loving yourself and of changing the type that you're attracted to, you may hit this point where you kind of hit the wall and you're like, this relationship's pretty good. Like, this person is growing on you. You're really feeling the feelings develop, but you're like, I don't know what it is, but it doesn't feel quite right, or something's missing. So what you're experiencing here is this, what I call the transition from a toxic or bad relationship into a healthy relationship. And in that transition, it can feel weird. It can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like something's missing and like something's not quite right. And so this goes back to what I talked to before about what your brain is wired to feel as familiar. Remember that you are used to people not treating you well, people being emotionally unavailable, people maybe even being abusive, and that's what's felt right. So remember that. If you're in this situation and you're with someone who treats you well and you're like, this just feels weird, I don't know. That's what's happening. Temporarily, you go through this transition where it just feels a little weird for a while. But if you stick with it and stick through some of the discomfort that comes up and some of this feeling like, I'm just not sure if this is the right person for me. Slowly, your brain will become used to kindness and love, and that will now be seen as familiar. And eventually, you won't feel like that something is missing anymore. And what also helps this is, again, to do the subconscious work. So if you have any interest in this, reach out to me, because this is, again, what I specialize in. It speeds that process up a lot faster. But yeah, so let me know, have you guys experienced this? Have you ever tried dating someone who was outside of your type when you've had bad relationships in the past? And if you felt that feeling of like, I don't know, it's just not the same. You don't have that instant feeling of like, I found the one, right? Because that's kind of what we're taught. This is what I was taught too. I was taught that you just know, right? You just know. When you meet someone who's the right one for you, you just know. And I would agree that this happens for many people who have relatively healthy backgrounds. They haven't had many difficult relationships. That's probably true for them. But for those of us who have had these difficult relationships, you're not going to feel that way. You're definitely not going to feel that way, especially in the beginning. Because remember, you're transitioning from being familiar with people who don't treat you well into being familiar with people who do. So let me see here.